Cool. Right. Well, I'm recording. Think you are as well. Andrew, how you
Uh-huh.
doing?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Yeah. Looking forward to doing some botanical biohacking.
All right.
I mean, this is biohacking is an area of interest of mine as well, and I think where I differ from a lot of biohackers is I always want to keep things natural if possible. And one of the first things I do if anyone says, "Oh, have you tried so and so?" is I check ingredients and I want it to be as natural as possible. And I think it helps me anyway. So that would seem to be a good area to talk about. And I know we're recording two podcasts as well, aren't we? One for your podcast and one for mine.
Absolutely, yeah. So, what kind of supplements or approaches do you generally take? I know that you're into the ketogenic diet and you've had Dave Asprey as a guest. So, are these kind of approaches that inform your way of going about living with zest?
They do, yeah. I mean, I'm interested in kind of trying loads of new stuff.
Uh-huh.
So I'll try everything as long as it's kind of fairly natural and I can tell it's not kind of going to do me any harm to try it.
Uh-huh.
But with the ketogenic diet, I've taken one or two supplements to kind of bolster things that might need a little bit of help with
Mm-hmm.
keto, for instance, especially when I was getting into it, taking mineral supplements, for example, because when you're taking less carbs on, you're kind of apparently flushing out a lot of minerals. And I definitely got very thirsty and needed to put salt in water and stuff like that. And then the other supplements that I take are based on testing that I've done, which suggests that I need it. So I've done quite a few amino acid tests recently, which suggests that some of my amino acids are quite low.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I think would be interesting that you and I could talk about is my cortisol levels aren't quite in the right place at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Bit sluggish in the morning and too high in the evening.
Oh, okay.
And I suspect that a lot of people are the same way. Bit overstimulated in the evening, looking at too many screens, staying up too late, um,
Mm-hmm.
partying too hard, whatever it might be, and that means they're a bit sluggish in the morning. So, um, is that something that you would kind of look into with your background?
Absolutely. And I can think just off the top of my head of a very easy way to help regulate this just by the way that we're breathing.
Oh,
So,
wow.
you know, when we're stressed out, when the cortisol levels are high, we always will, well, we typically will sigh, kind of,
Mm,
I've had the longest
mm,
day at work kind of thing, right? And in doing that, we're blowing off more carbon dioxide. When we have higher levels of carbon dioxide, it kicks up, they're called gasotransmitters. So they're neurotransmitters in gaseous form. When they're too high, it causes problems. When they're too low, it causes problems. You really want that sweet spot. So when it's elevated, chronically elevated, it's associated with lower memory threshold. Chronically elevated, it'll lead to major depression, these kind of problems. And one of the first to go is insomnia. So when people
mm.
are in bed and they can't get to sleep, the cortisol levels are jacked up too much. So by sighing, you can gear yourself down. I mean, most of my patients who come in, they have insomnia, they can't get to sleep at night. I'll say before we do any interventions, just spend 10 to 15 minutes in the dark sighing. And typically
Right.
they're out. And in the morning, it's the opposite. So when we're trying to gear up, we want to really be compressing oxygen into the tissues, and it's based on yawning. So it's a slight breath hold. So if you look at the
Yeah.
Wim Hof method, there's this hyperventilation followed by breath holding. So it's putting you into a state of hypoxia so that your body will kick up these gasotransmitters that help the oxygen then to penetrate the tissues. So if you want to gear up in the morning, there's a book written from 1,000 years ago in China, and they talk about taking a huge breath in and holding it for a count of 1,000. I'm like, wow, I can do maybe 200 or something like that on a good day, but maybe they're counting faster. So
Hmm.
by doing this, it's training the body to kick up hemoglobin and this kind of thing. So without any
Yeah.
supplements, just yawning and sighing, you can regulate quite a bit with what your body's naturally trying to do.
Yeah, that's very cool. You see, I thought you were going to recommend some kind of fancy supplement, and actually, it's
Uh-huh.
breathing. But that is one of the books that I've read over the last few years that's had more of an impact on me than most is a book on Taoism, which I guess is kind of what you're talking about right now.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it was called The Tao of Health, Sex, and Longevity. I
Daniel
don't know if
Reed.
you've heard of it. Yeah, Daniel Reed. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Is it Daniel Reed? Yeah. And he's been on my podcast as well. What an interesting and unusual man.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, the chapters on sex in that book are unbelievable. These Taoists, they knew a thing or two, didn't they?
Absolutely. And, that's the way Viagra works is through nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. So if you look at our approach is we look at the herbs that have traditionally been said to boost up chi, and then look at the pharmacology to sort of reverse engineer what's been going on. And then looking at, okay, here's this Qigong method or, yogic method or whatever. And then just looking at breaking it down. What's common to all of these schools? When it gets down to it, after 20 years, my teacher just kind of brought me into a room and said, so all this stuff is common sense and here's really down to earth. Here's the essence of it. And it was just like laugh out loud simple because it all came down to like, oh, if you want to boost your immune system, breathe like you're about to sneeze. I was just like, are you serious? I could have,
Yeah.
could have just told me this day one. But so we reverse engineer it a little bit and then it becomes really simple to use the theory or use the principle and then the tools don't matter that much. So you were asking before about cortisol. Another way you could approach this with kitchen spices is if you're eating something at night that is naturally bitter and sour, generally speaking, not 100%, these kind of flavors of foods, flavors of plants in particular, are higher in antioxidants. So this is going to have an antioxidant effect on this oxidative nitric oxide to gear down your inflammatory levels so you can get to sleep. In the morning, if you want to really perk yourself up, have ginger tea. It's going to be something that's a little bit spicy and warm to increase blood circulation.
Right. Yeah. What about this ties into both the topics we were just talking about over the last few minutes? Another thing that I thought I'd try was maca.
Mm-hmm.
And a mate of mine, Tim, was over the other day and he was like, oh, mate, don't give me too much of that. That's great. That increases the old libido. Mm-hmm. And is that right? Does it increase energy and libido?
I couldn't say for sure. I mean, I know people use it that way, but it really depends what the body might be missing. I'll give you an example. I saw this patient who was just really, really he was a big fat guy, and he had been taking some testosterone boosting herbs, which are said to do this. But in the context of him, it was just increasing inflammation on top of inflammation. It was making him gain weight. He was putting on water weight. So for him, we just took the opposite approach. We just worked on the gut and worked on the gut flora. As he started to lose weight, the libido came back. So I think, having the right strategy is key. For some people, I'm sure maca works great, but it's not something that I would stand behind and say, if you want to be the life of the after party, take maca.
I like it anyway. I like the taste of it. It's very nice. This is going down all kinds of directions I didn't think it would. This is what I love about Chinese medicine. There's thousands, and natural plant medicine there's thousands of years of knowledge, research, and testing that has gone into this incredible body of work, and yet it's almost kind of disregarded by the medical community.
Well, increasingly it's gaining traction. I work with a group of MDs, and because of the ability to sort of reverse engineer what's happening, we can speak with a common language.
What do you mean by reverse engineer?
I mean, by looking at something that is traditionally said to boost up yin in the body.
Right,
then
so yin is yin...
like the cooling, traditionally
calming
to
energy.
Be like the calming energy, this sort of thing.
Right.
And then if you look at what many of the herbs are doing that have this effect on the body, you can get a sense for what's happening, right? So if it's boosting up yang, maybe it's boosting up testosterone. A lot of the yin tonics are boosting up estrogens, this kind of thing. Not always, but you can get a sense for what's happening. So then I can work much closer with MDs as a result of this. There's also a large body of research that's been coming out of increasing quality. So, maybe 10, 15 years ago, the research coming out on Chinese medicine was pretty weak. And, it wasn't And the quality of the research, now you're seeing it in journals like Nature, which has one of the highest impact factors. So my personal dream is that Chinese medicine is killed as a separate entity, and that really there's just seamless integration, because at this point, as science is advancing, as the ability to look at what these herbs are doing physiologically on the body, I don't think that it's necessary to even have separate systems when you take a gas-centered approach to physiology. Sorry, I'm probably getting too often to left field, but
No. I mean, it's funny because ever since I read that book on Taoism, I got really into it. And in fact, next month I'm off to Asia, and I'm doing a course in Taoism and various elements of it. And so, yeah, I've felt like, and I agree, there's a place for both. There's definitely a place for Western medicine as well. But what are some of them? I mean, it's kind of early evening here and it's morning your time, isn't it? What are some of the things that you take on a daily basis? Because you've got a huge amount of experience in this field, haven't you? You've lived and worked in China. You've been recognized by the Chinese government. You're one of the highest qualified people in this area of natural medicine.
I would say the team that I work with altogether, we do pretty well.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Oh, you're a good team man as well, Andrew.
Yeah.
You're a good team man. So what are the kind of things that you do and you take which we might learn from?
Well, I keep it very, very simple, and I don't tend to use a lot personally. Like this morning, I'm drinking a Tibetan fermented tea, kind of like a pu'er tea. The reason I prefer this type is because it's grown at altitude and I live at altitude. New Mexico is fairly high altitude. So when you're having plants, when you're ingesting plants that are from a high altitude, as a general rule, they tend to help with hemoglobin and tend to help the body adapt to altitude. So that's just a preference, and it's a very warming tea, and I take warming substances in the morning. In the evening, I'll take cooling substances. Then in the morning, I'll do some type of qigong, maybe a breath holding, something like this, and then my body feels like I want to move. So I don't generally recommend, the sort of Spartan approach, get out of bed, just go, run like this, because the body isn't necessarily warmed up for it. But when you feel like, I've been sitting too long, I've got to get up and move, your body's energized that way, that's when I'll go maybe for a hike or a run or something like this.
So in the morning, you don't necessarily meditate, inverted commas, but you do a moving meditation with Qigong. Is that like the first thing you do in the day?
Yeah, and honestly, I'm a bit lazy and I don't want to spend a lot of time with it. I mean, I do also have a meditation practice I do a few times a week. But if I just, am on the move, want to go, I might just hold my breath for a minute or so. Not all at once, take a couple of rounds of doing that. Then as I'm relaxed and softly breathing throughout the day, I get a lot more I get oxygenation because of the increased hemoglobin. Then I'm able to think clearer, perform longer, this kind of thing. There's a herbal formula that works for me. I'm not suggesting it for everybody, and it's called shengmai, and there's a large body of research surrounding it. And it's ginseng, which a lot of us already know and love, but ginseng by itself, it's in and out of the body really quickly. So these two other herbs, one is called maidong and the other one's wuweizi, it doubles the amount of time that the ginsenosides stay in the system. And it is also a little more balanced. It has antioxidants in there so that the ginseng doesn't take it too far in terms of inflammation. When I take that, my appetite drops, my energy goes up. I can't say that that's going to be true for everybody, but that's just my personal experience.
That sounds like something a little bit similar to what goes on with ketosis as well.
Yeah, I think so. You're getting very similar clean burning, low burn inflammation that's going to be setting your body at the right point.
Yeah. And just on the Qigong in the morning again, whenever I've done Qigong, it's massive, and I haven't done it very much. It's massively resonated with me as something that I think could be a practice that gives me loads of energy and I really enjoy. I'm also quite interested in the martial side of it, which would then be going into Tai Chi.
Right.
And I've also tracked my energy levels over the years. And I know on the days that I work out, I have way more energy. but it's quite hard to find, especially in this city in London, and actually in a lot of places, it's quite hard to find regular Qigong classes where you might go, and where you might be able to develop some kind of push hands practice that could then develop into Tai Chi. I'd love to do that, but I can't really find that in London. So, I mean, what's the solution? Do you just do it at home? Do you do it in front of YouTube?
You know, the way that it's often done in China is not so much that you attend a weekly Qigong class, but the teacher will give you a particular exercise to do. For instance, it might be, you're stressed out. I want you to just sigh throughout the day until you naturally start to yawn. And that you get these kind of physical parameters to look for to get your body into an optimum state. So I don't believe it needs to be complex, or it even needs to be something that you show up to a lot. As to push hands and the way that you'll be feeling that in the body, to give you some background, I've done martial arts since I was 5. I'm part of a Taoist lineage of martial arts and medicine that goes back to the Ming Dynasty. And the heart of it is simplicity. So if you don't have a partner who you can really work with, what I suggest is just stand up straight and relax, and have somebody push on your body in various places. You can have an 8-year-old girl push you, it doesn't matter. And what you do is you just turn your body and yield with it, just as though it's clothing that's hanging on the line. And you'll find the areas of tension and fear in the body, and you can gradually let go of those. As you get better, you have someone stronger push on you. If you're stumbling and taking steps back, you're losing that tensegrity in the body because of fear. So you kind of take a sighing breath, you relax, you get yourself relaxed in a minute, and then you can gradually increase the force that you're taking in and yielding with it. And then if you go from there to a martial art class, you'll join the advanced ranks pretty quickly, because at the essence, keeping your footing and relaxation under pressure and being able to yield that way is what differentiates beginning martial arts from advanced. So it's very simple practice that you can do. You can have a friend just push on you a little bit. You can gain quite a bit of expertise, and it translates as well to every kind of physical activity you could want to do.
It's one of those things. So did you say you've been doing martial arts for many years?
Yeah, over 20.
And I guess you were in a great place to do it when you were living in China.
Yeah, in China, actually, I had a Kung Fu school, and the tradition there is people will, if you have a new Kung Fu school, go and challenge you. And I had quite a bit of that. And then through that...
So you owned a school, that was your school?
Yeah.
And people would come in and they'd say, right, I'm going to beat living bells out of you. I'm not quite sure if that's the expression, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wasn't something I wanted to do. The particular type of martial arts it's died out in mainland China. And my teacher's from Taiwan, and he said, I want you to bring this back. And, I was doing other kinds of business at the time, and I was like, all right, fine. But they came and everything went well. We all ended up being friends afterwards and, teach my son kind of thing. And then as a result of that, was able to get into kind of the martial arts society there and meet a lot of very interesting people, and a lot of times if you really want to learn some Kung Fu secrets, you got to get drunk with the grandmaster, and he'll show you it all on the palm of his hand, all the esoteric stuff. Like, oh, here's how the, Bagua, all this Taoist stuff is all down to earth. Yeah. And I learned quite a bit of these secrets while being, pretty pissed with people. So in the West, there's this idea with meditation and Qigong that it's just like stepping stone to spirituality. In China, one of the ways they test it is how quickly you can get alcohol out of your system. So they'll drink hard grain liquor, and if you're not sweating out the liquor right away, if your body metabolism isn't to the point where you can be thinking clear after that, your ability to transform poison is one of the traditional benchmarks for how good your Qigong is. Another is breath holding, and then guys will, the way they describe it isn't that, my chakras opened up and I achieved enlightenment. For them, they start at that point. It's like, oh yeah, so I just sort of said duh for a while until I wasn't thinking. Then I could hold my breath longer. And then as a result of this practice, I could have sex longer than anyone in the village. And I'm like, what? You're the head of this Taoist temple. What are you talking? It was just a very different, more down to earth kind of way of looking at it.
Yeah, I have a feeling that doing a Tai Chi practice, I've just got the sense that it would actually be very, very good for me. And I think when I've done Qigong, there's something, I know that my energy levels are increased when I do exercise. I know that there's something very meditative about connecting to the body in these kind of slow, mindful movements that I've done with Qigong. And I think that there's also a kind of a masculinity element that fighting, basically, would be kind of quite good for me, actually.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missing quite a bit. In Taoism, they talk about two sort of elements that you're boosting up in yourself, and one is called the hun. It means like like you're in good spirits, you're a good guy, you're altruistic. That's kind of, maybe we call it Buddha nature or something like this. And the other of equal importance is called the po. And the po is like your animal instincts. You see this, with cops and criminals. They'll always know. They'll get a sense for when the other is around. Maybe you could describe it as a sixth sense or something, but really it's just sort of the logic that every wild animal knows. And living in modern times and modern circumstances, it's very easy to lose that sort of animal logic and get sort of a physiological intelligence that that you can just get a read for somebody and get a feel for their body language at a very refined sort of sense, and for the scent that they're giving off. All of this very animal level stuff that we tend to gloss over in our pursuit of logic and wit and this sort of thing. There were people I met in China who maybe they only had a third grade education, but they could just size someone up instantly. And I think that's some very useful physiological information that you get from fighting and getting hit, and not even so much as getting the ability to overcome somebody, but the ability to reach deep inside and find those instincts for when you are getting pummeled, and sort of being okay with it and finding your way out.
Yeah, being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something, to be honest, it's not, it's something I need to work on myself more. I've been looking at finding people who are very good at pummeling others and who are in great shape because, a couple of reasons. One, it builds up that pull. And then the other aspect is you kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, I've found my weaknesses.
Yeah. The becoming comfortable with the uncomfortable is something that I've tried to do increasingly, and I know that's a kind of a Taoist message as well, isn't it?
It is. I was going to ask you about that. It's kind of like a pattern interrupt. So I was going to ask you, how does that work in NLP, and how would that be working physiologically for, I guess?
Well, the pattern interrupt, that's a little clue, it's a little giveaway, Andrew, that you know more about NLP than your average listener to Zestology or to your podcast, because that is kind of technical term. But you know what the pattern interrupt is, right? It's when someone does something so strange and so unusual that it completely takes someone out of their kind of natural zone and puts them into a little hypnotic trance. And once you've put someone into a pattern interrupt, you can then slip in a hypnotic message of what you would like them to do. Obviously, bearing in mind that we like to use our powers for good.
Right.
And the classic pattern interrupt is the guy who invented NLP, Dr. Richard Bandler, who he goes in with a handshake. Have you heard of this?
No.
Yeah. He goes in for a handshake, and he does this weird thing as someone is shaking his hand, which is so extraordinary and so unusual that it immediately puts them into a complete trance. And they're like that, head's gone, eyes shut, and they're in a trance because it's so extraordinary and it's so unusual. It's kind of stage hypnosis, but he's also using it for a therapeutic effect as well. Now, Andrew, I have tried to do the pattern interrupts myself. Turns out my hypnotic powers may need some work, but actually I haven't really tried that much because I'm not interested in, party tricks. And I think it is a party trick. In fact, in terms of the handshake pattern interrupts, I think it's quite, I don't think it's very healthy actually, because if you're standing up and you go into a trance, your head snaps back and that can be quite sore on the old neck. So, but the pattern interrupt is a fun technique, definitely.
I'm just wondering about the nature of, working on your weaknesses, because we tend to go with our strengths all the time, but sort of snapping ourselves out of physiologically and mentally what we're used to excelling at and feeling great about, but then being in some, bizarre new sort of situation. I'm wondering if that creates sort of a pattern interrupt that then allows you to, reevaluate or get new information in if you're sort of a full cup.
Yeah, that sounds entirely right. And whilst I've never thought of it in those terms, I think it's exactly what it is, isn't it? It's a life pattern interrupt when you get outside your comfort zone. And the reason that I've been so interested in this area is because I think I've always, by nature and by nurture, been someone who is, I find it quite hard to get outside my comfort zone. Once I've done it, it's brilliant, and you'll do it again. I like feeling comfortable, and I'm not a particular daredevil or risk taker. I've not done a bungee jump, that kind of thing. But actually, I know that when I do things like this, I'm absolutely buzzing, and it helps me to kind of expand my boundaries and my possibilities. So yeah, definitely, it's like a life pattern interrupt. It's a really nice way of putting it, and I'd never thought of that expression in that way, but I might well steal it from you.
Wonderful. What inspired this trip to China to study Taoism?
Well, it's Thailand actually.
I'm sorry. Is it Mantak Chia?
Yeah, it's not.
Okay.
But we looked him up. Is he good?
I think it's like this. I'll say there are a lot of people from legit lineages, and they take slightly different approaches. At the core, they're pretty similar. And I think everything that I've seen of what he's put out there is very standard. At the advanced level, does it become, I don't know. Some of these people, as you get into them, as you get into their methods, it becomes more down to earth and simple. That's my litmus test for it being legit. If it becomes a sex cult, probably not. I'm not saying that is anybody in particular. I don't know. I'm just, from what I've seen, it can go either way. So, buyer beware.
I would just like to make it absolutely clear on both our podcasts, I'm not going to Thailand for a sex cult.
Okay.
But what's interesting is that Mantak Chia is one of these people who is a Taoist expert who teaches in Chiang Mai, and we looked at that. And actually, the reason I'm going away is last year, I was lucky enough to take a month off in January and do basically have a load of fun and do a load of learning at the same time. And I went to a meditation retreat in Seattle called 40 Years of Zen, which is Dave Asprey's retreat. Have you been?
No, but I know Drew Pearson, who's
oh, great. Yeah, Dr. Drew.
Yeah.
Who I actually saw about a month ago in LA, and he is the kind of head neuroscientist for 40 Years of Zen. And incredible experience, like a week of meditating whilst wired up to electrodes all over one's head. And that really established my meditation practice.
That's brilliant. That's on my to-do list. What was it like? What did you discover about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd really enjoy it. It's not cheap, Andrew. If you can get Dr. Drew to give you a bit of a discount, that'd be great. What surprised me and what was great was the fact that Dr. Drew is not the only expert they've got there. They've got an incredibly talented team. So what you're doing is you're doing all these meditation sessions where they wire you up with electrodes. You go into a room and you're meditating, but they're in real time looking at what's going on in your brain while you're meditating and what the brain waves are doing. So then you come out of the meditation and you get all kinds of information, like certain meditation styles work better than others. And that's just day one. And then day two, you start working through your stuff, basically, your issues. And that was the really powerful thing for me. Yeah. That was the really fun thing for me, because we got a chance to kind of write down all the things that we felt might have had a positive, negative impact, the things that we felt might have stayed with us over the years. And then they give you this process for working through it under meditative conditions with these electrodes on that provide feedback, essentially, because you're wearing earphones as well, and it's kind of playing these certain weird sounds into your ears. And I had some kind of significant breakthroughs over the week. There's only 5 of you in the whole place, and it's in the middle of nowhere in Seattle. You all get to know each other very well. After each session, you spend quite a long time talking through with the kind of the doctors and the therapists what's happened in these sessions. So it's a trippy experience. And I came out of it knowing myself a little bit better, actually.
What was the net
so, yeah.
benefit on your life? I mean, if you could find something, did it give you more energy in the morning? Did you have a period where it was kind of maybe gearing you down or getting your body to rewire? Or what was the experience like?
Well, the tangible benefit is that I now meditate every day and I didn't used to. So that's the big thing. The slightly harder to pin down thing is that I learned so much about why I am the way I am that it helped with a great deal of kind of self-acceptance and self-realization. I kind of was already on that path and I learned some stuff. And it was really emotional at times for everybody. And we all learned a lot about each other, incredible amount. Stuff that I never thought I'd share with anyone that was really hard to share that I did. So slightly harder to pin down, but that's just as important. As I say, it was a continuation of a process that I've already been going through. But I would say, especially in terms of its effects on my relationship, that is absolutely life-changing. So yeah, pretty awesome. And then on the surface level, I'm meditating every day. Yeah.
Well, that's great. As far as regulating cortisol and, nitric oxide, just as an aside, everything traditionally described as qi, if you look into the physiology of nitric oxide and other gasotransmitters, at this point in scientific research, you can find a one-to-one correlation with everything traditionally said. So when you get the sweet spot of nitric oxide and these other gasotransmitters, it increases brain communication and it also signals neurogenesis. So when you're meditating for 2 weeks straight, it's signaling new nerve growth in the brain. And when we hit a night out on the town, when we have poor sleep, when we get punched in the head, that causes brain damage. So you want to be constantly cultivating that new growth.
Yeah. And in terms of cortisol, it's quite interesting because I meditate in the morning when I wake up. But actually, having looked at my cortisol tests, my cortisol levels are low in the morning and high at night. Well, in the past, I've kind of resisted meditating at night because I've always felt like it's so energizing, meditation, that it almost wakes me up. But maybe that afterwards, but maybe that is what I need to do, meditate at night instead of the morning. What do you reckon?
Well, I think I get the same thing. If I start meditating in the morning, it gears down the cortisol and I kind of lose my oomph for the day. I'm making clearer decisions. I feel like my memory is better. I have more clarity. But in terms of just having that kick, I lose it a little bit. So what I try to do is, we'll do the meditation. We do a Zen meditation with Dr. Tom Whalen, and we do 2 sessions of a half hour. And afterwards, I'm happy, but I've lost quite a bit of motivation for the day. So then afterwards, I'll do some of the Qigong, where I'm taking a deep breath in the lower abdomen, and I'll breathe in and hold it for maybe 30 seconds. And then I'll breathe into the chest and hold it for 30 seconds or longer. And then by alternating between the chest and diaphragmatic breathing and doing the breath hold, I'll start to sweat. I'll start to warm up. My heart's pounding. And that really sets the stage physiologically for, all right, I've geared up and I'm ready to go.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing I think that as my meditation practice evolved, I might be quite interested in that actually. Because, for instance, today, for example, I wasn't doing my TV job today, but I have been doing podcast interviews all day. And I was working quite late last night. So woke up this morning and basically been in the flat most of the day and went out for a little walk at one point. But essentially, I've been in the flat and I'm going to the gym in a couple of hours. Well, that doesn't really provide that burst of energy and cortisol in the morning that you want. So I think a kind of movement meditation in the morning might be quite nice.
Yeah, the Zen monks, they started when Bodhidharma came to China. The legend is that everyone was sitting around too much and they were getting lethargic. So then he taught them this, tendon changing, essentially yoga that was supposed to be perking them up so that they wouldn't just be lounging about all the time. So I like that when I'm, breaking up meditation or I'm looking to get started, then I'll do something like 8 pieces of brocade is pretty common. There are a lot of Qigong methods out there. What they don't tend to teach you is when to do the breath holding. And they don't do this for a very good reason. If you don't understand when you have too much or too little qi or nitric oxide or inflammatory factors, however you want to look at it, if it gets too high, it starts to degrade the brain and is associated with mental illness. So traditionally they'll say, yeah, if you do Qigong wrong, you can go crazy. But the Qigong that the people generally teach is, okay, we're just going to relax and breathe, and you'll get a little bit of warming sensation in the hands. And that's about as far as it goes responsibly. But when you start to understand your body a little more, all right, my tongue is red, my eyes are bloodshot, I need to start gearing down inflammation a little bit. Then you can start really gearing up the body. And the time it takes to go from sort of a very low energy level to really being bursting with it, the time it takes to train the cells that way is about 3 months. So, I did 20 years of meditation, whatever. It doesn't really matter. If you have the right method and you understand when you're going over the limits and when you're below it, it takes 3 months.
Yeah, wow. And are there any kind of particular Qigong or Tai Chi practitioners online that it'd be worth seeking out in terms of videos? Is there anyone that springs to mind or not?
Not really. I think all of them are, they're basically saying, all right, let's just keep it at the baseline. The only Qigong teacher who is teaching, I guess, the more advanced or level 2 is Wim Hof. And he's opened that up, for the purpose of, I think the original purpose is so you can, bathe in cold water, right? But there are a lot of people, I'm on his forum online, they're saying, I had bipolar disorder and I don't anymore. What's going on with this? And if you look at bipolar...
No way.
Oh, yeah. And I'm not saying do this and this will happen. But when you look at chronic diseases of the brain, you will find elevated nitric oxide and depressed hydrogen sulfide. So when we talk about yin qi and yang qi, or fire and water in these esoteric traditions, and you look at the methods that are designed to stimulate them and the herbs that you take to stimulate it, the hydrogen sulfide is an antioxidant. You can think of that metaphorically as your water, and your fire would be the nitric oxide. So you have too much fire, too little water, and you're a nutter. So if you don't want to get into this, state of inflammation, you want to be gearing it down, then you want to have lower, or the levels in check between the fire and water. Now, interestingly, the kidney qi in Taoism is said to, if it's high, from a traditional standpoint, then you have a long life. And it's interesting because hydrogen sulfide signals a gene expression of this gene called klotho. And when they block it in mice, the mice lived 30% less than the other mice. So if you're at the sweet spot of hydrogen sulfide, then you may be living to a full lifespan, which, I'll just use air quotes, that would be an immortal in ancient times would be someone who lived to 90 or above when everybody else is kicking over at 70.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I want that.
Yeah. Well, you're on track. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to ask you about a couple of supplements in a sec, but before that, let's just go back to sex cults, because I was just answering your question about. So that's what I did last year in terms of the month off, and then this time it's a month where I'm lucky enough to go to Thailand and going with my girlfriend, and we've got some time which we're going to go to this kind of meditation retreat. It's actually a monastery, but they kind of welcome Westerners, and they help you with their style of meditation, and there's loads of chanting, and there's quite a bit of silent meditation as well. It's in a beautiful place. It's near the Burmese border, and then it's a chance to do some courses as well. And there's one course that we were looking at the Mantak Chia course. There's another course. It's kind of like Taoism. I think there might be like some tantra involved, and people listening to that might be going, "Oh yeah," but actually that's like a whole kind of Chinese medicine and longevity tradition around tantra, and so that's that. We thought we'll just do like a few days rather than Mantak Chia's like 12 days. Then if we liked it, we could always go back another year and do that. But is it sex culty? Because I don't want to do that.
Well, when you're doing meditation, when you're doing Qigong practices, and some of the practices cause, a lot of nitric oxide buildup in the body, this is associated with hallucinations. So there are meditative practices out there that can lead to hallucinations. And, as you were mentioning before with the practice you were doing in Seattle, you're getting to very vulnerable places. And there are responsible ways to take that forward and irresponsible ways. And there are people out there, just as there are psychologists or priests who will leverage that space of vulnerability to manipulate people. And it's just, precaution. I think if it all gears back down to common sense and is enhancing your life, then great. If they say, okay, now your whole thing in life is to be part of our group or whatever, just run.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there who have the right information. It should be simple and it should be beneficial for your whole family, not just like stealing you away or whatever, spiriting you away for their sex cult.
I'm hoping that's not going to happen. You know what's interesting though, and that's I'm very drawn to teachers like you and anyone who says, look, try this, might work, might not, see what happens, kind of thing, rather than you've got to do it this way. I'm very dogmatic about it. It's my way or the highway. And I think increasingly around the world, there's a desire for that kind of teacher. And yeah, that style, like the kind of the gentler kind of suggestive style works much better than the kind of the authoritarian style.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm doing with my month.
Awesome.
Yeah, it should be pretty good. Bit of meditation. No culty.
No culty.
And no culting, and a bit of beach time as well. Now, what I wanted to ask you about was ashwagandha. Is that good for like sleep and cortisol and chilling out in the evening?
I can't say for sure because I would have to look from the research point of view. But as I'm not an Ayurvedic doctor, my background's in Chinese medicine, then the place that I personally like to be comfortable with is when in the Venn diagram of tradition, if I'm strongly rooted in tradition and in the science, then that's where I go ahead. What I would say is there is a push. Of course, you're going to find out about what's heavily marketed. And sometimes what's heavily marketed is what's most useful. In terms of getting to sleep at night, if you're in the UK, you guys have elderberries, right? That'll probably do it.
Oh, beautiful. So, yeah. You make it sound so simple.
It's supposed to be simple. I mean, you have something that's a little bit sour that's going to be high in antioxidants. And, I guarantee if you go to Google Scholar right now and you look up the antioxidant content of elderberries, it's going to be high. That's it. You have something warming in the morning. You have something cooling at night. You're going to be okay. And the other thing I should mention, I'm sorry, just quickly, I want to mention blue light filtering glasses are brilliant for helping you get onto that stable sleep cycle. So even before supplements, just make sure you're not polluting yourself with, artificial light, please.
Yeah, totally agree. And I've got more and more into the blue light blocking as well. Isn't it interesting that for all these supplements that, and people that I'm a member of various forums where people are comparing their morning stacks and that kind of thing. But for all these wild and wacky supplements that we can take, it's very simple tweaks to one's diet and fresh food and changing that and just a little lifestyle thing. Going to bed a bit earlier and cutting out the amount of blue light that's going on that actually works better. And when with the ketogenic diet, really it's just eat a load of veggies, eat quite a bit and have all the delicious fat on it and quite a bit of protein and just don't eat that many carbs. It's that simple.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really have to plan it out, but that works much better than taking really the ketogenic supplements or any other supplements in terms for me for energy. So it is simple really, isn't it? But I guess I was expecting you to come up with all kinds of crazy stuff.
I mean, when there are, when that doesn't work. So I tend to look at it like Chinese grandma level. Like, okay, what are some tweaks that you can make with diet, with lifestyle? And then there are people who work nights. Then there are people who have, more physiological problems, right? Then if you're looking at some of the herbal formulas in Chinese culture that have been around for 1,000 years or longer, they work very elegantly on cortisol, on, DHEAs, this kind of thing. They're working on orexins. Orexins will, if you want to talk about waking up with zest and not wanting to be lethargic, orexins are a very good place to look. And what regulates orexins is nitric oxide. So it comes down to chi, comes down to breathing, comes down to mental states. But
What are these orexins that we might look out for?
well, orexins are, basically these hormone cycles in the body that are going to, be signaling things like leptin versus ghrelin, so that you want to move more and eat less. When orexins are off, it's associated with eating disorders and things like this. So when people have, they're binge eating and they don't want to move a lot, it can have to do with these orexins, and as well as burnout. Many people, myself included, get into these cycles where just working crazy hard and I'm excited by it, and I just feel pulled through life and everything's wonderful. And all of that movement, all of that yang energy, it can literally start to disintegrate your nerves unless you're cooling it out as well. So anyway, the herbs work this way, the formulas work this way. But if it's something that's a general advice for someone to take, I wouldn't recommend that, because at that point it's medical, and it's good to see a doctor about that in that case. But when it comes to, all right, generally speaking, have warmer foods in the morning, have cooling foods at night, have warmer foods in winter, have more cooling foods in summer. If you are generally following that, you won't need to see the doctor anyway.
Now, something that I like to talk about quite a bit on my podcast, and I know you're a big fan of, is books. I always ask my guests for a book recommendation, and one tip for living with more energy, vitality, and motivation. So perhaps I could ask you for a book recommendation, and I'll come up with one in return, since this is going out on your podcast as well.
Absolutely. So if you want to really get the essence of Chinese medicine, when it comes to cultivating gut microbiota, understanding how to regulate gasotransmitters and tensegrity, the fluid movement that you find in internal Chinese martial arts, I wrote a book called Enlighten Weight that has all of that in there. I think it's pretty good, and as a central concept to take away from it, I would say, is if you are enjoying a Western diet, try having some ginger tea in the morning, or just tea in the morning, because it's going to help you digest and assimilate what you're eating. That would be my single general tip.
Very nice. Very good. The book that I would recommend is, I bet you're familiar with it already, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before. It's The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. And the reason that I think you might well have heard of it. Have you heard of it?
I haven't.
Oh, good. Oh, excellent. Oh, you're going to like this. This is right up your street. Josh Waitzkin was a famous chess player when he was a child. And in fact, the film Searching for Bobby Fischer was about him. And then when he became about 18, he was pretty much the best chess player in America. And he gave it all up. It's too much pressure, too much hard work, wanted to go and chase after girls and be a normal teenager. And then a few years later, he walked into a Tai Chi school in New York, and he became the national push hands champion for America. And then he became a Tai Chi champion.
Wow.
And the book, firstly, is a great story. But secondly, it's not how to play chess, and it's not how to learn to win at Tai Chi. It's how there were loads of similarities between learning excellence in both disciplines. And it's just so good. A lot of it's down to depth and really immersing yourself. But, bearing in mind everything we've spoken about in terms of martial arts, I think you'll love the book. And I find it's one of the very few books I can read again and again. There aren't many. So I'd love to know what you think of that. And I think your listeners would probably like it as well.
There's another book I was curious about, because I'm always looking for, saving time when it comes to patient education. And getting people who are in a crazy busy sort of environment to be able to take a minute to just relax. And I saw you have a book by the same name, and I was wondering if you could give the listeners of the Botanical Biohacking podcast a little bit of introduction about that, because I think that might be central before you even get into persuasion, is getting yourself to relax.
Yeah, so I wrote 3 books with Virgin Books a few years ago on NLP principles, and the first one was confidence, and the second one was relaxation, relax in a minute. And it was all techniques that you can use in a minute or less. And what's been interesting is that the explosion in technology and smartphones hadn't really quite happened when I wrote that book. Somehow I feel like I managed to tap into that, even so, into the relevance of how we've got so many demands on our time. We're so distracted. And really the way of putting it is that we've got so many inputs. There's so much input going into our brain that it's hard to come up with decent output and just to make sense of all the input as well.
Absolutely.
So it's not necessarily a particularly sexy tip, but one of the things I talked about in the book, and one of the things that I still do now, is I turn off all my technology and all my kind of connectivity for at least 2 hours every day, which actually doesn't sound like that much, but it's quite a lot.
Right.
And I do it in 2-hour chunks. So if I've got to like 1.5 hours, I don't think, I'll check my phone and then I can switch off for another half hour. I make myself do it for 2 hours. It's incredible, Andrew. It's almost always the best 2 hours of my day.
Wow.
That's the time when I read my book, or when I work out, or when I chill, or when I cook, or hang with friends, or whatever it might be. That's the time when I'm in my body and I'm in the moment and I'm, really doing the things that I love in life.
Oh, wow.
So it's very, very simple, but I think increasingly there is a yearning for digital detox and switching off and disconnecting, and that's the way that I do it.
That's brilliant. I'm going to do that. I'm committing to doing that the next 100 days, because that's
awesome.
I get pinged, quite a bit from acupuncturists around the country, around the world. I've got this weird case, whatever, and I'm very, very happy to help. But I feel the same thing. A lot of information's coming in, and if you don't have 2 hours, they also suggest 2 hours of silence a day can help with neural rewiring in the body, this kind of thing. And if input's coming in and it's not efficiently being sorted, you have a traffic jam, and that's not a good way to go through life.
Yeah, and it's so easy just to work nonstop, isn't it?
And if you love what you're doing, it's hard not to.
Yeah. It's a real. I think it's a modern affliction, and it's one of the biggest issues facing us today. How do we sift through all this distraction and live a life of meaning? It's just hard. It's hard, even if you're not like looking necessarily to kind of change the world in some way. If you want to relax, it's very hard if you've got a million different things going on as well. I mean, great example. I'm a big fan. You guys over there might not be big fans of the sport of cricket, but I love cricket.
I used to watch it in Canada. Yeah.
Oh, great. Oh, yeah, perfect. Well, at the moment there's been a very big cricket tournament going on recently, and a lot of it's been on in the middle of the night here, the Ashes. And I've been getting up quite a bit to watch it in the middle of the night, which isn't great for my sleep patterns, I can tell you. And of course, so I set the alarm, get up, watch a bit of cricket in the middle of the night. But my brain, and I know that most of the people I know are the same ways, these days I'm used to doing more than one thing at once. So I find it quite hard just to sit there and watch the cricket. I'll get out my phone and I'll see what people are saying on Twitter at the same time, or whatever it might be. So to do one thing at once is powerful and harder than ever.
Absolutely. It's funny because I think that's sound advice for everybody else, but then I think, well, that's for mortals. I'm meditating, so it's okay. I'm going to do two things at once. And I think probably everybody out there who does the same thing, we probably think the same idiotic thing. Like, oh, I know, generally we shouldn't, but, I'm exceptional.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And then, of course, the other day I've got this light that's called the Juve light. It's kind of infrared light, and it's supposed to be very kind of healing for you if you sit in front of it. And there's all kinds of scientific studies on how good it is for you. And I got sent it recently, and I thought, you know what? I could kill two birds with one stone and meditate while I'm sitting in front of the Juve. Even though it's not very comfortable, I could do that. It doesn't work. Absolutely doesn't work. And then it occurred to me, it's completely counterproductive. I'm basically trying to do the exact thing which I'm looking to meditation to help me not do, which is multitask and do loads of things at once. Well, so I've gone back to meditating without sitting in front of the Juve.
Is it warming as well, or is it just the red light?
There is no, it's not warming. I mean, there's a tiny bit of warmth. It is like sitting in the sun. It really is. although it's not, it's a very strange sensation because it's like a lovely sunbathe, except it's actually not warming. So it's really, really cool, actually. Yeah. What do you think of that from a kind of Chinese medicine perspective?
Well, the infrared heat is used quite a bit. People use something like foot soaks, or they'll burn certain herbs traditionally that have the infrared heat. My suggestion would be, if it's warming, if it's causing that vasodilation, if it's done below the base of L2, kind of opposite your belly button on the spine, there is that's the adrenal plexus, and by stimulating the adrenal plexus with heat, and I'm saying this freely because this is very general advice in China, is to keep your lower back warm. And I saw a study in Hefei. They had these mice, and they had dunked them in ice water and slapped them around, and their cortisol levels were off the charts. And then they did electric acupuncture on this point. It's called the gate of life traditionally, at the base of L2. The mice that had the electric acupuncture lived because the cortisol levels were able to be in check so that their immune systems didn't collapse. The other ones died of sadness, I guess you could say. Rough life for mice.
Goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hang on, what's the advice for the Juve then? Don't do it too much, otherwise I'll die of sadness.
No. Only if you get dipped in the Thames and slapped around. No, the basic idea is just to keep heat on your lower back, and if you do that before meditation around then that may be able to help regulate your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Acupuncture and heat therapy on that point has been shown to do this in mice and humans. So it may or may not be suitable for you. I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Andrew, it's been so good talking to you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. And where can people find out more about your podcast and everything that you're doing, and your website and everything else?
It would be at botanicalbiohacking.com. And we have, episodes, not quite as organized as yours is, but we're on our way. So if you'd like as well, you can...
It looks very organized. It looks very professional. I was having a look at your site before we did this. No, it looks brilliant.
All right.
Yeah, and for your listeners, my podcast is called Zestology.
Zestology.
Yeah. Brilliant. Let's do it again sometime.
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks very much.
If you'd like to receive an email from me on the show content, references, and contact information for our amazing guests, then you'll want to go to botanicalbiohacking.com. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the page. There you can sign up for our email, like our Facebook page, and rate us on Stitcher or iTunes, all in one convenient location. Thanks again for listening to the Botanical Biohacking Podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Miles.